Hello, and welcome to the second episode of my podcast, Raised by Religion, My Exodus to Freedom. This podcast is about being raised in the Church of Christ and also leaving the Church of Christ. So today's episode is called Live to Tell. And of course, if you listen to the beginning, you heard Madonna's song, Live to Tell. I love that song, and it describes so much of how I feel doing this podcast. I feel like I finally have a voice, and I'm using my voice to not only express myself and tell my truth, but also to maybe hold out hope to those who are stuck in any kind of religion that is abusive, basically. So today's episode is going to be my life story. I am going to try to keep this below 20 minutes because I don't want to go into too much detail, but I do want my listeners to know my backstory. So I was born April 4th, 1979. By that time, my parents had already converted to the Church of Christ. My mom grew up in the Baptist religion, and my dad, I don't know if this accurately describes his childhood, but from what I know, they basically went to church on holidays. Maybe they went more, I don't know, but it wasn't a major factor in their lives growing up. My mom was, if I remember correctly, she was the pianist in her Baptist church for like 12 years. So they got married, and they were looking for church, and my dad, he wrote a book, and he was looking for a Christian publishing company, and he looked in the phone book and found the first one. I forgot the name of the company, but it happened to be a Church of Christ publishing company, and the elders of the local congregation came and studied with them, and they were converted. And so a few years later, when I was born, I was born into it. It's all I've known. So anyway, my dad is a preacher. My dad's first preaching job. Oh, and let me go back a little further. He did go to the School of Preaching. They don't call it seminary like other denominations. They call it the School of Preaching. And he graduated, and his first full-time preaching job was in Farmersville, Texas. I have a lot of good memories of those people. They were, from what I remember, I was really little because I was born in Texas, and we left when I was 4 or 5 years old. I can't remember exactly. So I don't have a whole lot of memories, but from what I remember, they were really good people. And my mom and dad still speak well of those people. So that was his first preaching job. And then when I was about, like I said, 4 or 5, for some odd reason, I don't know to this day, I don't even believe I've asked what prompted my parents to look at a preaching job in Damascus, Virginia. But he ended up trying out there. It's a small town in Southwest Virginia. It's teeny tiny. And you can imagine how small the congregation was as well. So my dad got the job there, and we ended up staying there till I was 8 years old. Yes, because that is when a significant event happened in my life. My grandmother died by suicide, That's my mom's mother. And that happened while we were still in Damascus. So then we moved to, my dad got a job in Pulaski, Virginia, which was about an hour and a half, 2 hours away. So I started third grade in Pulaski, and I was there until I graduated in 1997 at Pulaski County High School. Just to give you a little background, I won't go into my childhood because it's pretty personal, but I will say that it was hard. I'll just put it to you that way. And I'm in therapy for a lot of the things, but being in the Church of Christ and being a preacher's kid and being a preacher's family is, I would probably say being a pastor's family of any denomination is challenging, to say the least. But it was very, very difficult for us as a family, for me as a child. I saw a lot. I saw good, but I saw a lot of bad. So my childhood was kind of rocky. When my grandmother passed, I took it really hard. She didn't live nearby. I knew her enough to know what kind of person she was, and she would call me on my birthdays. And I remember the last birthday, believe it or not, I do remember talking to her and Granddaddy on the phone, but, that was a significant traumatic thing that happened in my life. And I remember at that age of 8 years old, I remember I couldn't wrap my head around it. And let me give you a little bit of the Church of Christ perspective. From a very young age, I was taught, let me just say that, I was taught that if you weren't a member of, quote unquote, the Lord's church, as I talked about in my previous episode, then, you were doomed to hell. And I knew enough about my grandmother to know what a kind and sweet and dear person she was. And my little 8-year-old brain could not wrap my head around how could she be going to hell. So I just went downhill over the next few years. By the time I was in middle school, I really hated life. I hated myself. I was in a religion where I just never felt like I was ever going to be good enough. The really legalistic sects of the Church of Christ, the most legalistic, it's all about works, and it's all about checking those boxes, and it's all about you got to do this, that, this, and the other, and if you mess up one time, this used to be I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent. I'll be doing that. I squirrel a lot. But, this used to be a topic of conversation, and I've sat in so many Bible studies where this was brought up, like, if you're, and I used to, be scared of this when I was a kid, like if you wreck, and the last thing, even if it was in your head, was a curse word, then you were in danger of going to hell. So anyway, going back to what I was talking about, I developed depression. I became anorexic. Back then, that wasn't a word. I never knew what anorexia was. All I know is that I remember that the only time that I would ever eat was when I was at the dinner table, and then I would eat as little as I could get by with, and that was it. So by the time I was 13 years old, I wasn't sleeping at night, and I didn't know. My parents didn't know what was wrong with me. My mom even took me to the doctor, and they ran a bunch of tests, and the only thing that they could come up with was that I was anemic, but nothing explained my pattern of behavior. And I remember at night trying to contact my grandmother, trying to contact her spirit, because I wanted to know what it was like for her. And in a way, I remember talking to her and saying, I know how you felt, because I wanted to die. And I had been wanting to die for quite a while. So for months, when I was 13, I was in the 8th grade, for months I had been stashing away pills from the medicine cabinet, just a little bit at a time. Some of them were prescription, some of them were just like cold meds and Tylenol and stuff like that. And I had them in my dresser drawer. And one night, I didn't plan it really. One night, I didn't sleep all night. And it was time to get up and go to school. And I took a bunch of pills. So I went on to school like normal. I even went to my first period class. And one of my close friends, after class, we were at our lockers, and I said, I told her what I'd done, and I told her, please don't tell anybody, but I was scared. And I'm thankful that she went to the guidance counselor, and then they took me to the office, and I was hospitalized for a few days. It was really rough. So nothing really changed after that. There was a psychiatrist that came to my hospital room, and I just remember thinking, and you think that I'm crazy? But even at that age, I knew what to say to keep them from putting me in the hospital. I knew all the answers that they wanted to hear, and that's what I said. So, and as far as anybody else knew, I'd learned my lesson, blah, blah, blah. Not that there's a lesson to learn there, but that's how my brain thought about it. It was a lot different back then. So anyway, my teenage years were rough. My dad lost his preaching job. I'm not going to go into the personal situations, but it was a very, very rough time for us when I think I was 15. He lost his preaching job. If you know anything about being a preacher, you know that for the most part, you live in the parsonage, and you don't have to pay a house payment. Well, when my dad lost his job, we moved into a 3-bedroom apartment, which is a huge change from a big parsonage. I mean, it wasn't huge by any means, but it was a house. So, and then my dad went through a really dark time, and he didn't work for a while. So my mom worked 2 jobs. When I was old enough, I got my first job when I was a junior in high school. And I worked to help support the family because it was only my mom working at the time. And it was probably some of the darkest times of my life during that time. Because my dad stopped going to church. And of course, in my mind, he was hellbound because he stopped going to church. And by the way, I'm outside, so if you hear any rustling or anything, it's my dog. It's too pretty to be inside today. So anyway, when I was 17, I met my husband, and he changed everything. And when I was 19, we got married, and I moved to Tennessee. That was, when you're young and in love, you think, love will make everything okay. But, I was joined at the hip at that time with my family, and it was really tough being 2 hours away. So, of course I worked, and he worked, and then eventually, a couple of years into our marriage, we moved from Elizabethton, Tennessee to Roan Mountain, Tennessee, which is where we live now. And that was a big change for me. I didn't like it for years. I didn't like it because I felt really cooped up. We are up in the mountains. And now I love it. It's my sanctuary, but for a long time I didn't. So when we moved to Tennessee, got married, moved to Tennessee, we started going to the Church of Christ here in Tennessee, and I won't say which one. And eventually we visited around to different congregations. But by the way, there are lots of Churches of Christ in this area. I say lots. There's probably more Baptists than anything. But we went to Roan Mountain. Well, I said I wasn't going to say the name, but we went to the Roan Mountain Church of Christ. And we went there for years. And then eventually, after visiting around, we ended up at, my brother is a preacher as well. And he ended up getting a job at the Banner Elk Church of Christ in North Carolina. So that was actually the last church that I went to. So, and now here I am, about 2015. Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to end this podcast right now because it is right at 16 and a half minutes. When I do my next episode, it'll be Live to Tell Part 2. I will talk about my adulthood in the Church of Christ and go a little bit more into detail about the harmful doctrines that caused me psychological trauma. So thank you. And I want to shout out to the people who have listened to my podcast. I got several messages on Facebook of people supporting me, and you guys don't know how much that means to me. This means the world to me to know that I have people out there that love and support me. I'm very thankful, and I just wanted to let y'all know that. Anyways, stay tuned. I'm going to try to do at least one episode a week, maybe two. I'm going to shoot for two, but at the least one episode a week until I don't know when. So thank you guys for listening.